Hi, welcome. On this video, I want to take a few minutes to answer the question as it relates to defining so-called pure positive dog training. Now, this is where, again, I offer a very unique perspective on, what certain, defining what certain things mean based on showing what the process really is as it relates to training dogs. Again, I identify the process as a relational changing one versus either a full-blown learning-based exercise, which again I'll talk about this whole pure positive type of ideology, or some sort of middle-of-the-road learning-based exercise. And this is where you get into this concept of so-called balanced dog training, which I'll talk about on some upcoming videos. Now, the thing about when people throw around the word pure positive, again, this is where this kind of frames up into this issue about the process itself. People talk about reward-based, where you're rewarding the dog, for going into or responding and going into certain positions within this kind of learning-based narrative. And again, understand this is very popular in the mainstream dog training, this kind of position-based narrative where trainers, including balanced dog trainers, work off this this learning-based narrative, this interpretive script, where they're looking at the positions themselves and giving that a green light, saying, well, that represents a alignment or of not just the position but the state of mind of the dog, that good things are happening as dogs are going into these positions, and the dog's being rewarded for that within that parameters of that learning-based narrative. Again, what I show is that's a major problem in the dog training world, because again, how that frames up, as that picture takes hold, it does not necessarily mean that relational change is happening, that good things are happening, that the position itself is aligning with the dog's state of mind. Again, this is understanding about the motives of dogs, these control issues. So what is very common, it can be very common, is that even as dogs are going through the motions in the training environment and going into these positions, the dog can continue to hold on to control in the relationship. This is why people will go home with their dog and then wonder why this is totally disconnected, why they're still experiencing kind of like the laundry list of behavior problems, but everything in the training environment looked absolutely fantastic. This is really the number one problem in the dog training world, and it really affects a lot of trainers, including balanced dog trainers, even though they will have a sense that there's a problem and they may stay away from certain things, or they'll incorporate corrections, and they'll still work within quadrants. They'll say, well, I'm going to use 4 quadrants as opposed to 2. Again, I talk about how that packages up, how change is defined, why that's still a problem through incentivizing the dog on this position-based narrative. And I'll break this down in great detail in some upcoming videos to help people understand this, because it can be very confusing for people, especially for trainers who have invested in this way of thinking, because things will appear, again, appearance-based, things will appear a certain way, even though they're not. You have to be able to have the ability to go deeper, be able to test the motives of the dog at all points, and a lot of times this is simply not happening within the training environment. Again, it's really important. It has to be put to the test. But going beyond that, and getting in this issue about pure positive, what pure positive training really represents, again, I'm offering a relational perspective here, is this idea is that you can work off this learning-based narrative in a big way, that you can simply just reward the dog on just the dog going into positions, and you're again, okay, this is a problem. You're making assumptions that everything's lining up, And so this whole ideology, this type of, it's called pure positive ideology. And the reason people call it that is because it's all about, not focusing on the dog, putting the spotlight on the dog in this type of a learning-based cooperative narrative. And, and again, the problem here is that, just like I mentioned, that interpretive script is not put to the test. Again, I show very clearly, dogs are relational animals. It's all about the relationship. Very similar to parenting. Okay, you can you take what I show, you can apply it in the within the human context, and you'll see very similar parallels as to how it is that learning theory falls short or it doesn't line up, because again, it has to conform to the rules of nature. It has to align with not just the positions or through response with the dog's state of mind. But again, here's the thing: is you have to again, what makes this system of training very special is right out of the starting gate. I approach training for what it is. Okay, so how change frames up is it's identifying the process at the very start as a relational changing one. So it's not position based that way. The system does not conform to the mainstream that way, because it's understanding that it's critical that you're looking at the process itself for what it is, and therefore this assumption on a dog's state of mind through response is very problematic. So anyway, I just want to put it out there. When people throw around terms like pure positive training, it even goes beyond this issue about quadrants. Working within that narrative using certain quadrants is still as problematic. Those who use the term pure positive, usually balance trainers, will use that term to define this other group as balance trainers saying, well, they have a sense that, of course, that something's terribly wrong, and they're right. Within that context, however, oftentimes the whole issue of balance training, that in itself is a problem, because it's still approaching training within this learning-based narrative. And again, I show this. There's a type of spectrum that you can, very intentionally, you can kind of predict the risk levels through these positions, and how the dog's state of mind will not line up. Okay, so the furthest, as you take the training process from the point of what it really is, defining it that way, because that's what's really happening is a relational changing process. And you start to venture down that spectrum into this, within the parameters of so-called balance training, and take it to this so-called, pure positive. The levels of risk levels go way up. Okay, at that level, because again, pure positive trainers are basically approaching training as a full-blown learning-based exercise, and but again, they're giving it all a green light, and they're making assumptions. And again, this is why you're seeing. And then the problem there is the blame game starts. It gets shoved off as a problem with the dog. This is why you're seeing these problems with, even with dog aggression. People look at, well, it must be, the problem with the dog somehow with the, the bloodline of the dog. They get in all these different little kind of scenarios. And really, it's the approach. It's the fact of the process itself was not identified properly, and therefore everything, from that point becomes problematic. So anyway, just something to think about when you hear these terms, really to see it differently and to step back from it and look at the process itself, because ultimately when you have problems, it's going to be because of a failure to identify what the training process is right out of the starting gate. So thanks for watching.